At the camera. Don't have you.
It's the strongest Jeffrey show. Turn your bitter into better. Turn your better. It's the strongest Jeffrey show. It's the strongest Jeffrey show. Turn your bitter into better.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the Sonia Shockley Show. I am your host, Sonia Michelle Shockley, inspirational singer and speaker, life coach, soul nurturer, and your big sister in relationships. And I help people transform their pain into purpose and turn their bitter into better. Yeah. Doesn't that sound wonderful?
Yes.
Doesn't that sound amazing to be able to turn your bitter into something better? I'm so excited right now because I've got one of my good friends, one of my great friends. We've been good sisters since I moved here to Arizona. She is a phenomenal woman, very creative. And in fact, her expertise is with children. She is a child psychologist working in the field of education. And today we're talking about childhood trauma. Welcome, Dr. Yishka Trammell to the show. Hello, how are you doing today?
Hello. I'm wonderful. Feeling blessed.
Yes. What a blessing to have you. I'm so grateful that you were able to fit us into your schedule. We're excited.
Well, thank you.
Yes, I'm excited about today's conversation as we're going to talk about the impacts of childhood trauma. But if you could first give us a brief introduction of who you are and what you do.
Well, I am a doctor of psychology with a focus in child development. I am a nationally certified school psychologist and a member of the National Association of School Psychology. And I am kind of an advocate for children, I like to think. I do testing and diagnosis for children with a wide range of disabilities. I work with administrations and school districts to help provide for these children the free appropriate public education that they need to kind of fulfill their educational goals.
Yes. And it's so good to have advocates, especially for those who are most vulnerable.
Yes.
Think about those in our population who are the most vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, children come to mind, and also the elderly.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk a little bit about your story. Why are you so passionate
Oh, my goodness.
being an advocate for children?
Well, as a small child, I always thought of wanting to become a nurse or wanting to become a teacher. So in some capacity, being somewhat of a help. So, as I got older, I realized I was a bit squeamish. So nursing was kind of a little bit far for me, but I still wanted to focus on helping. And as I continued to mature, I always just had an affinity for assisting children. And so as I continued to look at being a teacher, I just have always had an analytical mind, and I've always wanted to kind of assess things and help, and how better can we work this situation for a good benefit. And so I kind of went into psychology, and it wasn't until my son, who was diagnosed in the third grade with a learning disability himself, did I kind of see maybe I wanted to go more into educational psychology. I feel as a young mother working with my son, I didn't always have the knowledge to kind of benefit him, to help him as his parent. And so I feel in some ways the ball was dropped with me. I wasn't worked with enough in the school to kind of get a full understanding of how to better support my son during this. Because before my son was diagnosed, I didn't even know that these kind of disabilities existed. I thought there was only two forms. You either knew what you were doing or you were possibly mentally retarded. I didn't know that there was kind of like a spectrum of midline of where you can have certain disabilities where you needed further assistance. So after that, I said, you know what, school psychology is it for me. And with the doctorate in psychology, I can work on school psychology. I'm also trained in family counseling, drug counseling, a gamut of other areas that I can counsel in, but my heart always has been with children.
I love it. And we live in an information age. And, it's information, we have easy access. It's just a matter of Googling. But for you to even be impressed to say, I'd like more training. I want to understand how can I support my son in a better way. I want to connect with him. I want to help him with his learning. That just says so much about you. Because first, I think, being an advocate just for your own children has helped you to now be an advocate for other people's children. So thank you for that part of your journey. What type of encouragement would you say to a mother who has noticed something in their child, that something isn't quite right, whether it's a learning disability or they feel that their child is going through some sort of trauma? What type of encouragement would you have for that mother? What should be some of the signs that they look for?
If a parent is noticing a change in the child's behavior, that is first key. We usually pay attention to our children as far as what routines they have, when they're falling asleep, when they're waking up, how much they're eating, and things like that. So when you see a change, whether they're sleeping more, sleeping less, they could be eating more, eating less, or they could just not be talking as much as they would normally talk, or maybe they're looking sadder, even crying. When anything changes like that, an open communication is always best. A lot of times I will get parents in the office, teachers in the office, and they're trying to figure out, well, little Johnny, well, I think it's this, and I think it's this, and I think it's that. And sometimes I'll just look and say, did you ask Johnny? Did you ask Johnny? What's the matter? What's going on with him? And they'll just look at each other like, well, no. Sometimes that's always the best, is just ask the child. Sometimes they're not as articulate to say what's going on. Sometimes they don't even know. But as you continue to further the conversation with them and keep the doors open with that communication, you can get to see some signs of what possibly could be going on. And then you discuss it with them, how they're feeling, when it started. And then if it's just so far out of your control as far as a caretaker or a parent, then you seek help. I mean, if a child had a scratch on their arm, you would say, let me get the Neosporin and the Band-Aid, let me get that for you. But if the child, cut a finger off, you're not going to get the Neosporin and a Band-Aid. You're going to run to the emergency room. So by the same token, if they're having any psychological issues dealing with things, you want to seek out that kind of medical attention. You want to seek out a therapist, a counselor, someone that, is trained in dealing with these things so that they can better assist the child and you with the child.
I love it. You are sharing. Can you hear me okay?
Say that again, you were muffled.
I said, what wonderful nuggets you're sharing with us today. Thank you so much. I want to talk about the definition of trauma. What exactly is trauma?
Trauma has a very short definition with, I would say, a lot of explanation. Trauma is basically an event or an experience that is deeply distressing, that is very disturbing to the individual. So with that being said, trauma can look different to different people. So just because this may be a trauma for one, it may not necessarily be a trauma to others. There are what we call major traumas. And when we're looking at major traumas, we're looking at things like abuse, and that could be physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. When we're looking at some major traumas, we're looking at violence. It could be violence that the child has to witness as far as domestic violence, or violence that the child is witnessing in their own environment or neighborhood, where maybe there's shooting going on, or murders happening in their own neighborhood, gang activity going on. Those we would consider major traumas. Other major traumas would include loss. The death of a close family member, or even a pet that the child may have been close to. Those we consider as major traumas. But a trauma could be, I hate to say as small as, but a trauma could be something as stubbing a toe, falling off of a bike. That can be a traumatic experience for some children that could give them some scarring if they're not able to work through it.
Yeah. I like how you show that there's a wide range when it comes to trauma. And it sounds like trauma is unique. It's whatever has that negative impact.
Mm-hmm.
So for some, falling off the bike may not be so negative. Mm-hmm. But for someone else, they may, fall off and say, I'll never try that again.
That is true.
So I really like how you show that it's just a wide range when it comes to trauma, and that helps us to be more sensitive to others when they're saying that I'm hurting about a situation. We should not just judge it and say, well, hey, I was able to get over that. Why?
Exactly.
And that allows us to be more sensitive, to show more compassion to individuals who are experiencing the long-term effects that happen after some types of trauma. So I thank you for sharing that. So now as we look at trauma, from what I understand, when you have this shock to the system, because that's basically what has happened. This is a total shock. You've been ambushed. This was not something that you were anticipating. It's a shock to your core belief system, something that you thought was safe or true. Now you're finding out that person isn't safe, or the situation isn't safe. It's not what you believed before. So you've experienced this shock, and the brain now takes a picture, a photograph, using all 5 senses: the sight, the smell, the touch, the taste, the hearing. Talk a little bit about how the brain may react when triggered by certain things that stimulate these 5 senses.
Well, the brain is a highway of pathways. If you think about the most intricate freeway system, all freeways lead to somewhere else. That's how the pathways in the brain kind of work. So as we are developing, we have a certain set of pathways, and usually they start off pretty healthy. And then once a trauma hits, depending on how hard hitting that trauma was for that child, you can start with the suppression. So what happens is as the body has different physical reactions, the body is thrown into this fight or flight mode where a lot of hormones are released because the body is getting prepared literally to either fight off the danger or run from the danger. But a lot of times in a trauma, what happens? We freeze and we're just sitting there. And so all of this pent up and built up energy that is ready to explode with you is kind of sitting there. And so it's overwhelming the body's senses. And so the brain has to say, let me shut this down. And so that could be part of a suppression. So now a different pathway is made. Instead of that pathway going the normal route, it changes. It goes somewhere else. Sometimes as we get older, we can kind of help cultivate suppression and the different pathways. Sometimes they're healthy, sometimes they're not. Some healthy forms of distraction could be working out or exercising or being in a sport, which kind of allows you to use that energy, that fight or flight energy that's being built up. A lot of times people choose sleep or even drug use. And that can be drugs or alcohol. It could be prescription drugs. That is an unhealthy way of dealing with changing the pathways, because that will most definitely change the pathways and encourage the suppression, but it's definitely not a healthy way. So as the brain continues to make different pathways, it changes our outlook, it changes our perception, it changes the way we start to respond about certain things. And sometimes it gets to the point where we don't even remember what the actual trauma was. We just remember the residual. We remember the colors, the smells, like you said. We remember how we felt, but we don't know why. And then we start reacting to those things. And then that becomes a normal pathway for us to now start responding in that manner based on that smell or that color or that sound. I hope I've answered that well for you. Sometimes I get off and get into it and
I love it. I love it because it's triggering so much in this conversation, because I think about those who've had some sort of sexual trauma, and they'll say things like, "I remember the smell of his cologne," or someone who has been in, like a house that was burning, that type of trauma. The smell of something. The odor. The sound of maybe someone screaming in the background, the taste of something that you tasted and now you're traumatized. And so many times, from what I understand, what you're saying is we may not even know why we're reacting or responding the way we're responding, but we know that there was some sort of previous trauma. And now the brain, to protect us, has suppressed it to just help us to be able to go on.
Yes, to function.
Yeah, to function. Let's talk a little bit about the fight or flight and the types of hormones that are being produced in the body and how they affect the body in a way that's not so healthy. It's good in the beginning, but then if it just keeps coming like that, it can have a detrimental effect on our bodies. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Cortisol is the main hormone, and that one in itself is not detrimental to the body, because again, it promotes the body to be strong enough to fight, even in some cases where you see the mother lifting up the car off of her child. That's the kind of energy that the body is now producing. The body is amazing. So when it's not being used, that's when it's toxic. That's when it's poison. And like I said, when you're traumatized, a lot of times you're frozen. You're just sitting there with your mind ruminating on what's going on, trying to comprehend. And so you have this built up cortisol where you might possibly be able to lift a car, but you're not doing that. So now it turns toxic and it eats away at your circulatory system. Your heart is now palpitating. It could be skipping a beat. It's beating fast at times, and then it slows too far down. And so you might start to get lightheaded and dizzy. If you're an adult having these issues and you suffer with any hypertension issues, that can cause your systolic and diastolic pressures to go far beyond they need to go. You also may have other issues as far as sweating and your lymph system. again, those are the issues that, the physical issues that will be taking place when you're in this fight or flight mode. So again, not using it, the brain has to say, shut off. And a lot of times people get so tired after these episodes that they really do need to go to sleep. They feel like they've run a mile. They've breathed so heavy that now even their chest is starting to ache. And a lot of times these anxiety attacks, these panic attacks will feel like a heart attack. And I know sometimes if someone was to come into an emergency room with those same symptoms, a lot of times they will give them the pill for stopping a heart attack because it's exactly what it looks like. So, and the body has a threshold. So the body can only take so much. So once the body is reaching that threshold, the brain's saying, shut this body down, shut this body down. Can't go any further.
Wow, this is exciting. I'm thinking of post-traumatic stress, the people, and, of course, when you're in a war zone, the adrenaline is high, the cortisone is high, and I need to fight. However, then now coming home from that, and there's so many children, just a simple walk to school could be traumatic.
Yes, definitely. Depending on the neighborhood. If they're living in a fearful neighborhood or a neighborhood where they're always hearing sirens where they know something is going on, or they're hearing gunshots or things like that, it can be very fearful for a child to be walking outside of their house just going to school.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking of. So let's talk about some of the risk factors. Let's talk about the risk. And let's talk about the preventative or the protecting factors that could help a child when it comes to trauma.
Yeah, when we look at trauma, we all as individuals have what we would call protective factors or risk factors. Protective factors are basically those factors that would lend healthy outcomes. Protective factors, some of the strong ones would be relationships with family members, relationships with friends, just really strong core relationships, someone that you feel you can depend on, someone that's got your back, someone that you feel encouraged just being around. Though that's a very, very awesome protective factor. Another protective factor could be the comfortability of your environment. You might live in a nice mansion home in an area of a nice cool breeze, maybe even by a beach. I love the beach. You can also have a good protective factor in yourself, intrinsic value with talents or gifts that you may have that make you feel good about yourself, that you engage in, maybe drawing or the arts or something like that, even down to reading. A lot of kids will have things like that offer a good feeling, a good identity about themselves. And then on the other hand, we have risk factors, and we all have those as well. As we talked about the environment, that can be a risk factor. If you're living in an environment where, what are we going to eat? There's no food in the house. If you're living in an environment where, oh my goodness, it's too loud, I'm always hearing fighting, I'm always hearing gunshots, that can cause someone to feel anxious all the time, not knowing what's going to happen to them. We also have some relationships that could cause a risk. If you have someone who's touching a child inappropriately, speaking to the child inappropriately, making them feel dirty, making them feel bad about themselves, that could be a heavy risk factor on that child. Also teasing. Teasing is very big because we know bullying is an issue within the schools, but bullying doesn't always just happen at school. Sometimes you have that older sibling. It could be an older cousin that bullies you, that teases you, talks about how you look, and that makes you feel bad about yourself, doesn't make you feel good about yourself. Those are risk factors. And I like to look at them as we've got protective factors in one basket, we've got risk factors in another basket. And there's no set formula. Everyone's different, depending on the temperament of the child, they would experience the protective factors and the risk factors differently. So we can say that each protective factor has a weight, each risk factor has a weight, and both baskets are on a scale. So whereas a protective factor, possibly a relationship with a grandparent, maybe this child may only see this grandparent once a year for 2 weeks during the summer, but it's an amazing 2 weeks. It will hold some weight with that child as a protective factor. But on the other hand, if you have another child whose grandparent may be a live-in grandparent, where they're able to interact with that grandparent on a regular basis, day to day, day in, day out, that relationship may hold a bit more weight. So even at the same traumatic event happening to each child, both children are going to experience a little bit different depending on how strong that protective factor is in their life. So that's how I like to explain it and how I like to look at it. So and I appreciate what you said before when you said one incident of falling off a bike may not be traumatic for this child, but it may be for another. And that goes along with depending on what protective factors does this individual have, what other risk factors does this individual have. And it's not to be taken as a blanket, okay, every time someone falls off a bike, it's going to be traumatic. No, it's going to be different based on that individual, based on a lot of different variables. Like I said, one being their temperament.
I love it. Basically, what I know, one size fits all. When it comes to trauma. And even though we may have had similar traumas, we will be affected differently. It has a different impact. And this, of course, is aligned with me as far as a grief coach. I understand that grief is unique, just like your fingerprint.
Yes, it is.
Just because a person may have lost their mother does not mean that their story is similar to mine. You know, we just have the same loss, but our grief and the way we've been impacted, there's a uniqueness about that. So I love what you're sharing. I want to go on now to phobias. I hear many people saying I have a phobia now, whether it's with spiders or with heights.
Oh, wow, it's a big one.
Yeah, you know, now they have this phobia of something. How does phobia, if or it may not, how does that relate when it comes to trauma?
Well, some phobias can definitely be extended from a traumatic experience, but not always. So if you have a child that may have been boating with their family and the child happens to fall off and the child knows I can't swim, and the child, of course, gets flustered and maybe some water gets in their nose and in their mouth and they're finally rescued, but they start to cultivate a fear of open water because of that experience. That would be a phobia that's built on a traumatic experience, but it doesn't always have to be in that manner. Children are sponges, we know that. So from the moment they're born, they are learning about their outside world, and they don't always learn about their outside world based on what they may specifically experience. A lot of times they're learning about how to interact with the world around them through their caregiver or their parents. So you mentioned spiders. So say you have a child just paying attention to their mother, and they are noticing that every time their mother sees this thing with 8 legs crawling around, the mother screams and gets hysterical, and she starts having a reaction. The child is witnessing this. So eventually the child's going to say, every time I see this thing, I know to be scared because mama's scared. It must be something dangerous. So now the child is developing a phobia or a fear of something just based on learned behavior, watching their parent interact and how they interact. And so now that's pressed upon them. And sometimes phobias can happen that way as well.
I know, because when I think about water, and for some reason, when we see a baby around water, we just start like, no, the baby's by the water. And I about some, of course, in some families, they just throw the baby in the pool, they teach him how to swim, and he's like a natural.
We did.
When you think about it, this baby has been in the womb for 9 months, surrounded by water.
Mhm.
And it was just fine. So now if we would just continue that and not show a fear for it, but allow them to have fun in the water and just helping them to learn how to swim and float, how that could be something different. So no,
Yes.
definitely, because we see in different cultures, there's different fears for things.
Mhm.
With different ethnicities, they have a certain phobia for things. And then other people are like, wow, what's the big deal? Who cares? Let's go on an adventure. So I love
Yes.
how you
Yes.
put that just now. And I also loved how you talked about the brain, especially for children. And we know this critical age is between birth and really,
5 years.
yeah, 5. I've even heard
5.
7 years. So you're saying 5, you're the expert.
Mhm.
We've got this window that the brain is soaking up everything.
Mhm.
And so we can understand that children are excellent recorders,
Mhm. Yes,
but
definitely.
not the best interpreters.
That is true.
Okay. And this is why we have now children who grow up to be adults
Mhm.
interpreting something one way when really that's not what it is. So
Mhm.
I loved it when you said that. Any more reflections on that before I go on?
No, no. The we as individuals, the most that we're ever going to learn is between our birth and 5 years old. We will continue to learn, but the most that we're going to learn is compacted in that 5 year time span. And even if we were to live 200, 300 years old, we will never learn as much as we had learned during that first 5 years, that it's such a critical age. And so definitely depending on who our caretakers are, we're learning how to react, how to respond, how to speak, how to use language, how to use our bodies in that time frame. And once those things are learned, we know it's very hard to unlearn. So if we've got traumas that are happening within that first 5 years that aren't addressed, those can potentially be traumas that have a lifelong effect on that individual up into adulthood.
Yes. Mm. This is some good stuff, Dr. Yishka. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're my friend. I wanted to talk a minute about how we can, what's the word I'm looking for? How we kind of coddle or nurse woundedness. I think we kind of get to a point, sometimes some of us like being the victim.
Mm, mm,
Attention that the victim always seems to get. And we've kind of learned to nurse that woundedness and
mhm.
that sad story of, poor me, look at what happened to me. Can we talk a little bit about that? Moving from the victim mindset to now taking on a mindset of a victor. Moving from that mindset of I'm in a mess to now I'm a messenger. How do we change from being that complainer to the praiser? That
Well,
warrior to a warrior. Can you talk a little bit about that now?
well, I'm glad you mentioned your grief counseling, because a lot of times these wounds become our babies,
Yeah.
and they become so a part of our life. We have been functioning again with the brain waves and the suppression. We have learned to function with it. It now becomes a part of us. We love this part of us because we're trying so hard to love ourselves. Even when we feel we don't, we're still trying to. So because this traumatic experience is a part of me, I don't want to let it go. It's part of my identity. It's why I do what I do, why I act the way I act. It's me. And I don't want you to cut this away from me because now it's my baby. And a lot of times we maneuver through life as such. and we expect people to treat us in this way. I expect you to yell at me. And even so, if you don't yell at me, I've got to do something to force you to yell at me, because that's the only way I feel my identity. I feel like myself, because this has been such a part of me. I've allowed it to be such a part of me. So as far as grief counseling is concerned, when someone is working through their traumatic experience and they're being asked to, hey, give me your baby, give it to me. You're not going to see it anymore. This baby is going to be put to rest. That's grief for that individual. They are like having to mourn a part of themselves that they have so long, like you said, coddled. They've so long treated it as a part of themselves, and they really don't want to let it go because it's comfortable. It's familiar. If I don't have this trauma, what else is there? What's going to replace it? So a lot of times we play the victim because we don't know any other way to behave.
Oh, I love it. You are such wisdom today, and I want to just say again, thank you. To whoever is watching at this time, I see quite a few are watching. You're getting many hellos. We're so happy to see your beautiful face. If you have questions, please feel free to put those questions in, and we want to ask Dr. Tramiel while she is here with us. Let's talk a little bit about hoarding.
Again.
Yeah, because I know that the hoarding is a part of, I have this detachment or attachment disorder. I can't seem to let go. I'm afraid of letting it go. Let's talk about those who have been hoarders, whether they realize it or not.
Hoarding is a part of the OCD, the obsessive compulsive disorders. A lot of times we look at those disorders as someone's constantly washing their hands. They're a germaphobe. They're always cleaning everything, cleaning. But hoarding is a part of that. And when we look at obsessive compulsive disorders, it's based on control. The person may feel out of control in their life, especially with traumatic experiences taking hold and their body doing things that they can't control, their mind running in ways that they can't control. What can I control? I can control how many times I wash my hands. So now that becomes something that you love about yourself because that's something that you feel in control over. Other obsessive compulsive disorders with control have to do with anorexia, have to do with bulimia, how you are controlling what you eat, when you eat, how much you eat, and whether you regurgitate that food. So when we look at hoarding, it's a value that's placed on certain items. And hoarding takes many different mindsets. Some people hoard things that may be of value. Some people hoard things that are not. Some people hoard trash and garbage. And I'm talking about when you go to the store and you buy a box of grapes and you eat the grapes, you keep the box. Whereas most people would throw that away. You keep the box, and you might see in someone's kitchen boxes that grapes were in. They have made an attachment, just like people would attach their baby as that traumatic experience. That's my baby. Now these boxes are now my baby, and they literally don't want to part with them. It would be grief for them to part ways with whatever they decide to fixate on in hoarding. Some people hoard things like objects, pencils. It could be anything. It depends on that individual. Sometimes it would seem that the traumatic experience causes them to hoard certain things, certain colors of things. And again, there's a whole gamut of different ways that this can play out. But the hoarding is an attachment that they put on it, a psychological attachment. as if it was part of them, as if it was their baby. And when, people would come and say, oh, well, just throw this away, this is trash. You wouldn't say someone's child was trash. And that's exactly how they feel. Wait a minute, this is not trash. This is my baby. It's been with me for years. I love this. And taking it away from them causes grief. So, we must be very careful in how we treat them about their hoarding, because we don't want to, again, traumatize them about now what they've made their safety net. So definitely, if you're unable to deal with that situation, whereas you're a family member and you just don't understand, you can't comprehend why this person is doing this and what's going on, and now it could be causing a health issue, because now they can't get out of their house. They can't move around their house. They can't cook in their kitchen, because now their kitchen is a sanctuary for all the things that they're hoarding. They can't even sleep in their bed because they're hoarding so bad. That's the time to call in some assistance, to call in a specialist that specializes in dealing with people with OCD, specifically hoarding, to kind of come in and do it in a slow motion where you're not re-traumatizing this individual by trying to give them assistance and give them help.
Yes, thank you. And you use the word control. Why is it so difficult, just in your opinion, as a mother, as someone who's experienced life, and then, of course, working with your different clients? What is it about human nature that it's so difficult for us to give up control, to just surrender?
Control is safety. I mean, that's one of the needs that we have, is to feel safe, to feel that we're being taken care of. So control is a way that we feel safe. If I'm controlling how I'm taking care of me, I'm going to be the best one to say how hot I want the water, how cold I want the water, how hot I am, how cold I am, how I want to dress, how I want to look, how I want to do this. We feel, of course, we feel that we know each other. We know ourselves better than anyone else can know us. So we want control over all the aspects of our life. And sometimes with that control, we can overdo it. And that's where we get those OCD behaviors from. But control is all about feeling safe, feeling like I know best. You don't know best. I don't want you to control this aspect of my life. I have to control it because only I know how to do it.
Yes, for sure. And even in my own life, I'm learning to redefine what surrender looks like.
Definitely.
Yeah, especially with my walk with God, because surrender for me always looked like uncle. It looked like, okay, I've had enough. It looked like it's something I'm being forced to do. Surrender, and also the word submission. And when I began to view submission in a different lens, and see that even in the surrendering, there's still a power in it. There's still many positive things about just surrendering and allowing myself to, just like an eagle, float with the wind. Allow myself to now ride with the wind when I surrender, or like a person floating in the ocean, just floating with the waves, allowing the waves to just move you. And so there is beauty in surrender. And we can come to that point of releasing control. We'll find that we'll experience more joy, more happiness. There's so much on the other side of just being able to surrender that control, especially in our relationship with God. So thank you so much.
Yes. I definitely agree with that. And being a Christian, I do appreciate during counseling when the client allows me to speak of my Christian walk, because they also are Christians and they may believe in God. It makes it somewhat easier when we are dealing with the subject of control, because I'm not immune to wanting control. I found myself in situations where I've just tried so hard to control things, and you come to a point where I got to give it up because I'm not doing a good job of this control thing, of controlling this and that. But, in the scriptures where God is telling his children, don't worry about this or that. And haven't I colored the lilies of the field? Haven't I made them beautiful? Don't I make sure they have their nourishment? Don't I make sure the bees are coming around and doing their business? And you are more than that. You are definitely more than this flower. You are more than the birds of the air. So I'm going to take care of you. Let me have control. I try to practice that with myself because it's definitely easier when I can buy into these things that I might be helping someone else deal with. But definitely it literally feels like a weight lifted when you allow your higher power, your God, to take control over every aspect of your life and take and carry those burdens for you that you're trying so hard to carry and control.
I love it.
Definitely a difference.
Yeah, because I think it's not by might, it's not by power, but by my
Yeah.
spirit. And when we release that control, we
Mhm.
actually tap into unlimited resources.
Yes, definitely.
Because we've been trying to fix it with our resources, with our understanding, with our wisdom, with our
Mhm.
insight. But now when we release that control and tap into
Mhm.
the spirit, we can see that we're opened up to even more. So yes, I love what you said.
Mhm.
As we're closing, I know we're closing up in just a few minutes. I wanted to just go back to trauma for just a few seconds and talk a little bit more about childhood trauma. For
Mhm.
someone who they know something isn't quite right,
Mhm.
you talked about seeking help, um, finding someone who's safe that they could talk to.
Mhm.
What are just some of the first steps for a person like this?
Are we talking about the child seeking help, or are we talking about the parent dealing with the child?
Both, whether we're talking about a parent who sees that something's not quite right, I know you touched on that earlier, or an adult who
Okay.
knows that something isn't quite right because they haven't really faced this difficult event in their
Mhm. Mhm. As a child, as an adult, paying attention to a child, whether it be a parent, sometimes it's not always the parent that notices the child is different. Sometimes it's an aunt and uncle, and that's okay. That's okay, because sometimes as parents we get busy, especially if we're a single parent and we're trying to be mommy, daddy, housemaid, cook, and we're trying on all these hats. Sometimes we can lift the paying attention to our children, and we may not notice certain things that we may need to be noticing. So again, with the saying, it takes a village. It takes a village to raise a child, and sometimes it takes a village to notice changes in a child. But if someone was to notice changes in a child, the first thing I would say is to just open a conversation up with that child and ask them, hey, Johnny, I've noticed that you haven't been eating, like you did before. I noticed you like mac and cheese and you've not been finishing your food. Are you feeling okay? How are you feeling? Is what's going on at school? A lot of times, if you get the child talking, you will get your answer. You will see that there's something going on with that child. And then at that point, you can take it to their parent and discuss it as a whole. And if it's something that you feel is just too overwhelming, definitely seek out care. Again, we wouldn't let the child cut his finger off and just sit there and bleed out. No, we're going to seek some doctors that may need to do a suture. So by the same token, we should also seek out therapy to kind of assist the child in dealing with these experiences that they're having. As adults, a lot of times if we've gone through our life not getting any assistance for our traumatic experiences or for some of the issues that we may be facing. We may feel, oh, I've been dealing with this all my life. I've been doing fine, when you're not doing fine, but you're thinking you're doing fine. It just goes back to assessing yourself and being real with yourself. Okay, how is life going? How are you feeling? Can you do things that excite you, that you love? Are you kind of feeling like your life is on a repeat, just running through life? You might even hear things from people around you. I've noticed lately, you're just kind of been a party pooper if your friends and family are saying things like that to you. Self-reflection, assess yourself. What's going on in my life? How am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? And if you're feeling overwhelmed, talk to someone. Maybe you might be a little skeptical of seeking out therapy. You may have your stigmas about therapy. But talk to someone you trust, talk to a family member, talk to a close friend. And at that point, if it still is overwhelming for you, if you had a disease, diabetes or anything, you wouldn't just try to deal with it on your own, hopefully. You would seek out medical attention where you can receive some help, possibly some medication to better your situation and get healthy. By the same token, if you're feeling depressed or you're feeling anxious about anything, seek out therapy. It's not to say that you now have to be entered into therapy for the rest of your life. Maybe you just need some help in coping skills, help from someone who has dealt with these things before that can kind of give you some tips and tricks and some homework to do so that you can better cope with the issues that you may be having and what's going on.
Yes. And I enjoy what you're saying because it sounds like when you said it takes a village, you still need that village even after you're an adult.
Mhm.
You know, you need that coach, that mentor, that
Mhm.
best friend, that person who's willing to show you your blind spots.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because many times as adults, you know, we might think of it as one way, it's okay. But
Mhm.
someone else can say, "Hey, you know, your slip is hanging," in a loving way, of course.
Yes, yes, definitely.
We always want to say it in
Don't
a
re-traumatize the person by trying to get to the bottom of their trauma.
That's right. I've so enjoyed this conversation, Yishka. Truly, your name says it all. It brings laughter. It brings joy. We have had some wonderful times together. Of course,
Yeah.
traveling and just laughter. You know, we're being a little serious now, but we know we can both be very serious, very silly. And I
It's a secret. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone.
secret. But I think it's one of your superpowers. I think because you have not lost that inner child and you're willing to celebrate that, it's what helps you to even connect better with children. It's
Mhm.
what helps you to be an advocate for children. And so I just want to just let you know how much I appreciate what you
Thank you.
to the table. This is a powerful ministry. This is something that's so needed in our churches. We need
Mhm.
more of this, more of these types of conversations to just give people more direction and guidance
Mhm.
and
Yes.
clarity. So I want to applaud you. I want to applaud what you're doing and just say thank you as your sister. I also wanted to just close out by reading the prayer of serenity.
Mm.
We talked about releasing that control, and I think that was probably one of my biggest takeaways from our conversation today. And so the serenity prayer says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living,
Amen.
living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right, if I
Mhm.
surrender to your will,
Yes.
so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever and ever in the next. Amen.
Amen.
And
Amen. Beautiful.
that's just a wonderful way to end our show today.
Yes.
Just wanting to let the audience know how much I love you, how much I'm praying for you, how much I want you to win at life. And I know that it starts with just changing your lens, looking
Yes.
at
Thank you.
things from a different perspective. And I hope that you were able to receive some of these rich nuggets, these gems
Mm.
that Dr. Trammell shared with us today. So for now, God bless all of you, and may his peace continue to shine on you, and may you know how special you are. You are special, you are valued, you are seen, and you make a difference. This is Sonia Shockley from the Sonia Shockley Show. Take care and God bless.